I love the ocean. Living most of my life about half an hour away from it, I get to see it a lot, and touch this fine line where our world ends and another one awaits. It's easy to wonder what things may lurk in its depths that we'll never see, and imagine that maybe there are people down there who regard us in much the same way, or who may not even be aware there's an entire world up here, and we're the strange alien ones. Today, I'm going to show you one team's imagining of just what's down there, turning their gaze to the surface. Hold your breath, folks, we're going to Aquaria. Hey guys, Nickon Aquamagna here, and today, appropriately enough, I'm here to show you a game about the ocean. I'll separate this into two videos. The first part will cover the gist of the game mechanics and such without spoiling anything major, and the second part is where I'll talk about the game's story and how the game changes the further you go in, and just how much of an impact it left on me. Another thing, I'm changing the name of this series. Gaming Injustice, while pretty apt, just makes it sound like I'm throwing a temper tantrum over nothing. From now on, I'm calling these videos Games Done Justice, or maybe Gaming Done Justice. I'm still deciding on that, but I really want to drive it home that at its best, this all too rarely revisited show is about standing up for games that haven't really had their due. Special thanks to GZG92 for inspiring the name change. Anyways, welcome to Aquaria. In this world, you play as Nyjah, a merfolk who isn't the typical mermaid that usually springs to mind. Her species is more like frog people, or those salamanders who have both a working set of gills and lungs. I like this. She has a pretty cool design, and I especially like the choice of skin color. The light green is really easy on the eyes and helps her stand out against a lot of the backgrounds. I also like her character quite a bit, which is pretty important as you can imagine. This game is not kind to her, but she has this innocence all throughout in spite of it all. There are many little things in the environment, creatures, or set pieces that make her gasp or go, wow, or even laugh. These may be little things, but they went a long way to make me feel for Nyjah the more I played the game, and I wanted her to have every short-lived moment of happiness I could give her, especially on subsequent playthroughs. So how does Aquaria actually play? Well, at its core, it's a Metroidvania game, but there is more to it than that. It's kind of like Echo the Dolphin, except it's really good, and not just okay at times. Being an underwater game, you swim around a lot, and the swimming controls are excellent, whether you're using a mouse or a joystick to pull Nyjah around. Before going any further, I want to apologize for the quality of the footage. This game runs super smoothly. I mean, it better. It's almost 10 years old and my computer runs it just fine. Recording it is a different story, so the frame rate's gonna dip a lot in this video, and I feel it doesn't really do the game justice, so I hope I didn't give you a bad first impression of the game. When you start the game, Nyjah doesn't really know much about the world, and even most of the other denizens don't understand that there's a world outside Aquaria. They just sort of think everything ends at the surface, which they call the Veil, and the god of the ocean may as well be the god of the universe in their eyes. There's also this energy that binds everything called the Verse, which might make you roll your eyes a bit at first, but when you find out what the Verse really is at the end of the game, you'll either roll your eyes even harder, or you'll think it's brilliant. Drawing from the power of the Verse, Nyjah is able to sing enchanting songs, and a lot of the game is built around this mechanic. You match the notes together in a sequence to play certain melodies, transforming you into other forms, unlocking certain areas of the game, or even using it to tell a seahorse which way to go. There are other little things here and there, certain tests or minigames that I won't get into, since I could spoil some of the really important bits I'm saving for part 2. Still, I'll give a couple of examples. I will say that they usually hint at what you're supposed to do in creative ways, like a magical singing octopus that projects the colors of the notes you hit to play an important song in another room. Teach me more, O wise creature. One of the more serious examples involves finding a carving in a wall that depicts other beings singing, with the notes etched next to them, and the way the magical singing is drawn is pretty creative as a big swirl. Just find the door and sing the tune and it opens. There are other bits like that, but as I said, I don't want to give everything away. One of the first spells you unlock lets you grab certain objects, mostly rocks, and lug them around with your mind. This is mainly used to clear obstacles, but you can even use it as a sort of attack, dropping boulders on potential threats or ripping off an invulnerable enemy's shell to make them vulnerable. Some of these animals will try to kill you, others don't want anything to do with you. The more dangerous wildlife will be aggressive, charging at you or even firing projectiles your way as soon as you appear, and some dangers are just obvious, like lionfish. Things like this will poison you, but usually only for a little bit. I was able to kill this thing just by dropping rocks on it. Once you unlock your first transformation though, you have a much more efficient means of attack. When I first saw this gothic looking character appear in a vision at the start of the game, I thought this would be a Gianna's sister sort of deal, but nope, this is Nyjah, and it's just one of many magical girl transformations there are to enjoy. These forms are great. You get some with range attacks, you get this beast form that makes you strong enough to swim against currents that would normally push you back and cut you off from certain areas, you get one that lights up dark areas. It's good stuff. This plant-based form can open warp points, mouse, which, yeah, it does come in pretty handy, but I think there should have been more of these. They're pretty sparse and situational, but seeing how huge some of these boards are, being able to skip across some of the more labyrinthine areas via the warp points would be a good way to speed things up if you want to backtrack to a certain place or other. You obtain a few of these forms by defeating bosses and accepting their power, and then there's a couple that you can just find in the world that give you some extra ways to make it past a certain obstacle or find more collectibles. The fish form and spirit forms are completely optional. Playing the songs for most of them is easy and quick enough, but a couple of them are kind of annoying to trigger, and you might even activate another form by accident, and just changing forms during a boss fight can be nail-bitingly stressful. Thankfully, you can change instantly by hitting a form's assigned hotkey in an emergency. Unfortunately, there aren't nearly enough buttons for most controllers to include these hotkeys, so you might have to pause the game, reach over to your keyboard, unpause the game, press the hotkey, pause again, hold the controller with both hands, unpause, then get back to playing. That is, if you don't want to take the time to play the songs. It isn't a huge problem, it's just something that couldn't really be avoided. I like the singing mechanic and consider it an important part of the game and its world that helps flesh it out. If you're wondering why I'd even want to use a controller for this type of game, well, that's just what's easier for me most of the time. I'm not good with a mouse and keyboard. I have a much easier time playing games like Amnesia with a controller. Sure, I haven't found a way to spin objects around like you can with a more traditional setup, but I can do all the essentials just fine. When I use a mouse, that's dedicating my entire right hand to just a couple of buttons, unless I were to get one of those really expensive mouses that has like 17 buttons on it, good lord. Anyway, this leaves more work for my other hand, which is to jump around the keyboard like mad to do everything else. But using a controller, I can do 3 or 4 different things at once with just one hand. I can use both joysticks at the same time. It's so much faster and more intuitive to me. I'm not advocating that more people start using controllers for more games, but if you're like me, and this is the way you play most of the time, you'll still like this game despite some of the options being limited to hotkeys or a little easier with a mouse like cooking. Layered around the world, you'll find plants you can pull out of the ground to harvest their goodies, or various fish you can hunt down for different kinds of meat. And then there's these colorful little bulbs you can pop by hitting a note with a matching color to get rarer items or learn new recipes. You can make soups, rolls, cakes, all with varying effects on your health, defense, speed, and attack strength. You can even make one of your forms poisonous for others to touch for a short time. Simply put 2 or 3 ingredients together to make a dish. There are also ingredients you can add to things you have already made to make them even more effective, or spicy at least. For example, making a roll and then putting fish oil on that roll will make it tastier and replenish more health. Some items are much rarer than others, as you can imagine, like eel oil, but most of these items are easy to get if you can just find the right areas where the creatures or plants that drop these are more plentiful. And like I said, some of these items you can just craft from more common base ingredients if you can find the right recipe. Some recipes require 3 ingredients, which at first you can only put together in Nigel's kitchen, but there's a mysterious being somewhere in the game that I found completely by accident who will make that 3rd slot available at all times if you play a memory game with him. They seem nice enough to me, but I'm not telling anyone where to find him. Simply increasing your attack power for 45 seconds during a boss fight can make a huge difference, and there's even a few other instances where they come in handy. For example, there's one collectible that's just barely out of reach under normal circumstances, but if you drink the right soup and power up your beast form's movement for a short time, it's a cinch to get. I'd show you this, but I feel it gives away too much about the game's world for this video. I'll save it for the next one. Anyway, I like cooking in this game. It's a lot like Mirror Monster's cooking, only a little more straightforward. It's a good crafting system that works for people like me who don't care about crafting systems much, but appreciate simpler ones like this. A lot of the bosses and even some of the normal enemies involve some puzzle to get to them, but they're usually simple enough that I rarely needed to look up a walkthrough to see what I was missing. Some of them are pretty clever, like something you'd see in a movie, like this one. Then there's the weirder, less obvious enemies, like this giant testicle with eyes and warts all over it. At first I thought I just had to keep firing at one of its eyes until it broke, then go after each of the other eyes. After a few minutes of not getting anywhere, I noticed that when struck, the eye would fire a laser for a set amount of time. Long enough that I got the idea to see if I could hit all of the eyes before the first one stopped firing, getting all of them to fire at once, and lo and behold, that's how you get it to stick out whatever this prolapsed thing is. Then I just fired at this new weak point until it died. There are a lot of cool things like that in this game that make you feel smart when you figure them out on your own. So I'm gonna do you a favor and leave the rest a mystery, though it rarely gets more complex than this. Even so, when I got to the last phase of the final boss, I was completely lost, and I really shouldn't have been. I won't say anything more about in this video though. A lot of these bosses are completely optional and will leave behind some treasure like a special suit of armor that increases your defense or regenerates your health to some degree or other stuff. We'll get back to these in a minute. Now let's talk about the world itself. I really like the way Aquaria is constructed. It starts out small, then broadens its focus tenfold. No, more like 200. You started in a little cave, which opens up to an area that only gives you access to a couple of levels. At this point in the game, I didn't think it was going to be that big. I mean, $10? Most Metroidvanias being released these days go for at least 15, sometimes more, and most of them are pretty big, but not super big. I figured I'd have my fun for the day and beat it in 5 or so hours, but I was dead wrong. It ended up taking me 17 hours to beat on my first playthrough, almost 18, and that's not including all the times I died and had to try again. I am not kidding when I say that Aquaria is gigantic, easily one of the biggest Metroidvanias I've ever played. As soon as you beat the first major boss, you open up a big portion of the rest of the game, and after you beat the next boss, most of the game is now at your fingertips. It really does feel like an entire world, like an ocean should. It gets to a point where certain parts of the map are layered over each other. It's so huge, I admit I was a little overwhelmed at times, but I had all the maps memorized before long, and they let you use these mystical turtles for fast travel if you're willing to seek them out. There are so many environments, it really shows a talent behind this game. How they managed not to make most of these places look all kinda samey. One of my favorite areas is the Kelp Forest, which I may have started exploring a little sooner than I was supposed to, but it was such a cool place I didn't mind turning around and coming back eventually to explore the rest of it. This area left such a strong impression on me, it was a pleasure to get a taste of this place. Another example like this is the Abyss. I didn't have the sun form when I first entered this area. I didn't even know about the sun form at the time. Some stretches give you enough visibility to see where you're going, but then there are parts that were pitch black, with spikes on the walls that I couldn't see hitting me. A little ways in, I saw a glowing fish and noticed that it was drawn to me when I started singing, even changing the color of its own glow to match my notes. So I kept singing to the fish so it would accompany me for as long as I could get it to. I actually managed to get pretty far this way, and was able to make it to a few other areas even after losing the fish, as other light sources appeared. But then I wound up trapped in the darkness with no way to find my way back, and in dark areas like this, unless you have the sun form, you can't look at the map to see where you're going. I was trapped. For a moment I was worried the game would end for me right there and I'd have to start over. You'd think this would make me frustrated, but I just became more determined to find a way out of here. I looked up a map on my other computer and was able to guess where I was from what I could remember of the layout on the way. Then it was a simple matter of guessing where I was going. The way back was too narrow and hazardous to risk getting hurt anymore. I had to find another way to escape. I was in the dark for a long time, but I found a part of the map that looked more spacious than the rest and probably wouldn't have me running into spikes constantly on the way. Then I just swam left for a while, blind as a bat. A little later, I ran into some other glowing fish, and I was back on track, eventually finding my way out of the abyss. I felt like an explorer, lost in the depths with nothing but a half-finished map that someone scribbled on an ancient rag to help me. It might sound silly to some, but I enjoyed every little adventure I had like this. It's an easy game to get lost in, but in a good way, because the world of Aquaria is fascinating and full and feels so real for what it is. It's not like places like the Abyss are just badly designed in practice in gameplay. Some of the hazards actually glow when you come near them so you can avoid hitting them. Still, you gotta be careful where you go. There was also an entire level that was completely out of the way that I found near the end of the game. I just happened to remember a dead end where a spirit form would come in handy and remember to come back with it later, and the area that followed was one of my favorites, full of animals that just made me smile to see them. I'll save that for part 2 though. So yeah, this game is huge. If this were like other Metroidvanias where all you can do is run and jump around, it would take forever to beat and way too overwhelming to get into, but swimming makes this the perfect game to have such a vast world. It feels like you're flying, sorta. You can just keep going with nothing to hold you down, and it's because the game is built around this that there are so many awesomely designed areas. I never started to feel like I was just swimming through the same layouts over and over again with a few assets clicked and dragged around, and the assets themselves aren't repeated as much as you'd think. Every map feels distinct, which is extremely important in this sort of game, especially such an artsy looking one. But of course, what good is having a world to explore if there's nothing to go exploring for? Well, on top of the world itself just being very well constructed, there's lots of treasures you can find, along with the recipes and some health upgrades. Most of these treasures don't actually do anything, aside from a few suits of armor that affect Nyjah in some way and or give her an extra ability. They're mostly alternate skins for her to wear, or little knickknacks that she decorates her home with, you know, like Ariel would. By the way, I just gotta say that Nyjah has a really cool house. This place has a little of everything, and it's fun to come back to now and again to see it come alive with all the stuff you found while exploring. You'll even see some of the more docile animals making themselves at home. You even have a room where you'll practice riding seahorses around. How cool is that? Like the world at large, you can't explore all of these areas of your house at first, but once you get a few powers, there's so much to see. Let's talk about memory crystals. These red gems are where you save your game. There are enough of them layered around that you won't go too long without being able to save, but they can be easy to miss, so keep an eye on the mini-map in the corner of the screen. The mini-map will point you to the nearest one with a red dot, even if it's your first time ever visiting an area, so that's nice. Be sure to save often. I won't say this game is stupid hard, but it's really easy to wind up in a bad situation and get killed. There were several times where I didn't think I had to save and wound up being sent really far back and having to track down a recipe or a health expansion to get them a second time. So again, just be sure to save often and don't be an overconfident fool like me. Now you may have already noticed this by now, but this game is beautiful. More beautiful than a lot of similar, more recent games that go for this whole painterly sort of look. Keep in mind that this game was released in 2007. It's gonna be a decade old pretty soon, and these visuals easily hold up. Mostly. The Kelp Forest is a great example of where the art shines. I've seen a lot of portrayals of the ocean in games that make it look downright desolate, but Aquaria has cool places like this everywhere. I can't believe how clean the water looks here with all this foliage. It's so inviting. There are more foreboding areas too. Heck, by the end of Nigel's adventure, this simple, happy, wholesome swimming game will have completely transformed into a nightmare world. There are things I couldn't have imagined seeing when I first started playing, and I love it when games can do that to me, to constantly defy my expectations. As beautiful as Aquaria itself is though, I will say the models could use a bit of work. Don't get me wrong, they look nice, but they're very simple. This isn't usually a problem since they take up a very small part of the screen, but it's their animations that feel a little off. Let's compare it to Dust and Elysian Tale. Dust himself is animated more traditionally, cycling through many frames with different drawings to convey movement and actions. Naija, on the other hand, is a puppet. She feels more like a flash animation on the primitive side. It's more of a typical click and drag puppeteer style of animation, and in her case, it really isn't so bad. But some of the animals you meet will literally flip around like a prop on a stick when they turn to swim the other way. Like, that's not even animation, that's a cutout. So yeah, as nicely drawn as these things are, they don't quite hold a candle to the sort of animations we see in later games. Again, this game is old. Still, nothing looks downright bad by any means. This is just one aspect of the game's visuals that I feel hasn't aged quite as gracefully as it could have. If this game were being made nowadays, I doubt there's much that could be done to make the environments or backgrounds more beautiful than they've always been. This was already top tier stuff. But the models? Yeah, there's room for improvement there. While the models could be a little better animated, just that the game in general looks better than a lot of similar games being released nowadays is a testament to how ahead of its time it was. I wouldn't even know this was an older game just from looking at it, that's how good it still looks. Then there's other things like the writing and voice acting. I won't give away much of the story yet, I'll just say that it's kind of all over the place, but most of the places it goes to are good. Like, this is pretty mystifying stuff. There isn't a lot of voice acting, but Naija's voice actress is very good, even great at times. She doesn't lay it on thick like a lot of VAs who give their characters an accent, so she's probably the least annoying insert fantasy creature with an accent here that I've come across in a long time. It's very natural. As for the writing, it's pretty eloquent at times, but it's a little too wordy for its own good. Naija comments a lot on each new place or certain events, and most of the time it's what you'd expect, but there's a couple of bits that come off as kind of goofy. There's a moment where she says, "Her gaze penetrated my soul," where most people would have just said, "Her gaze pierced my soul," or something like that to give an example. When you first enter the Kelp Forest, Naija is awed by the local wildlife and uses a lot of big words to describe what she sees. And I don't mean these words are literally long, I mean they're big concepts, countless and infinite. It just seems like the writer was trying a little too hard to tell us this world is huge and super amazing when it's already obvious to anyone who sees it and has played this far into it. Again, I just think it comes off as a little try-hard now and then, almost like the writers didn't have that much confidence that the world itself would wow us and they needed to drive it home with fluffy prose, which is pretty weird to me. I mean, I think this world speaks for itself, they're just telling us stuff that should already be apparent to us. Aside from a few instances like that though, the writing is as good as anything else in the game. The game also has one of the most beautiful and effective soundtracks I have ever heard in a game, and I don't make that statement lightly. It's not something I'm going to change my mind about after playing another game and declaring that one as one of the best soundtracks ever. I mean this. Like, okay, some of you may be thinking, well sure Nick, there are a lot of games with pretty music, this one can't be that exceptional. But look, you don't understand. I've heard a lot of music in games that was pretty, sure, but also sappy, and empty even. Music that didn't really have any meaning and was just whipped up to compel people to cry regardless of the context or situation. Like, this is one I keep hearing in a lot of animations made with games on YouTube in the last year or so, stuff like Trains with a Z. And it's a nice tune, it's not bad in any way, but it's so overused I get a little annoyed every time I hear it again. I think, ah, come on, there has to be something else that would fit there. Chances are you might actually know what tune I'm talking about. And even if you don't, I'm sure you've heard it somewhere. But this game's music isn't beautiful because it sounds pretty, it's meaningful, it's deeper than that. I don't see a lot of this music fitting in most other games, or even stories. Just sort of hearing it behind my voice in this review is one thing. Just listening to the soundtrack by itself on your own time is one thing. It's still nice that way, but something is missing. It's another thing entirely to let it suck you into this world, the way it matches the visuals, the story, the environments. It really helped get me emotionally invested in this game. Not only are most of these tunes decently memorable, not only do they suit their environments perfectly, but they do a great job giving this game an identity that sets it apart from other Metroidvanias. My love of the ocean and everything it contains is on full blast in these tracks. Every emotion that the ocean has the potential to make you feel has a tune for it somewhere in this game, whether the ocean makes you feel adventurous, inquisitive, cautious, fearful, loss, hopeful, determined, sentimental, inspired, lonely, peaceful, overwhelmed, focused, joyful, or just relieved at times. This soundtrack captures such a wide range of emotions that this one game inspired me to feel more things than a lot of other games I've managed to in my first playthrough alone. Even the shorter tracks made for cutscenes at other moments don't feel less important than the stage themes, which is something I see happen in a lot of games unfortunately. I'm a sucker for this tune. It's also one of those games where most of the bosses have their own themes, instead of just reusing the same one for all of them. It's a great soundtrack that gets me a little choked up when I think back and remember some of these tunes, which isn't something that I can say many games have done to me, as much as I love music in games. It's so consistent in this game. I know I'm repeating myself a little here, but I need to drive it home that this game is something else. It is a little of everything I could want in a game that I haven't found in enough others. I can't gush enough. Sadly, despite getting good reviews at the time, and high praises from anyone who actually played it, it didn't sell very much. Not enough that the guys who worked on it felt the sequel was justified anyway, which really stinks. Heck, these guys aren't even together anymore. The original team behind Aquaria is disbanded. Now every time I start up the game and see the BitBlot logo, which is actually pretty nice and inspired and beautiful, it just makes me feel bad. I think the game came out at the wrong time. Like I said, it was pretty far ahead of the curve, probably so far ahead people couldn't even see it around that bend. Games like Super Meat Boy, or just called Meat Boy for a time, wouldn't be released till a while later, and the whole retro indie scene hadn't quite taken off like it has in the last 6 or 7 years. Which is such a shame, because I think if this game came out a little later, maybe a year or two, it probably would have sold better, because there'd be more of an established market for it by then. Heck, I could see Aquaria faring better if it was released in recent years. It has so many things that people are asking for nowadays, but didn't really know they wanted then. It's a game from a time before Day 1 DLC and microtransactions and all that stuff, where games could just be fun, and that's how they needed to be. I'm not here to make excuses for why Aquaria sold poorly. I am trying to rationalize it though, because I just don't see how else such a lovely game could be so tragically overlooked. If there is any gaming injustice we can take away from this, I'd say it's that. Just because this game didn't have its time in the sun when it was first released doesn't mean we can't show appreciation for it now. I could wax lyrical about this game all day, but I think I've said enough for now. Aquaria is one of those games that would normally only appear in my dreams, and here it is! You can get it for $10 on Steam, Good Old Games, BitBlot forums, or other sites for your PC. While I've talked a lot about this game already, I'm just skimming over the surface of some of the crazier elements. You haven't seen anything yet. This is that rare sort of game that constantly played with my expectations and toyed with my emotions all the way through. I had no idea what was coming next, and it was one good surprise after another. There's a lot of Metroidvanias out there right now, most of them very good, but not many of them being a must-buy or once-in-a-lifetime kind of experience. But I'd classify this as a must-buy if you like the ocean half as much as I do, or want to see everything a game like Echo the Dolphin had the potential to be if done right. I don't usually push this hard for people to get a game that I talk about. I mostly just share my view on certain games for the sake of it. But I urge everyone who's even considering checking this out, or has even the slightest passing interest to try it if possible, even if it's just a free demo or something. If you like games that feature any of the things I've talked about, or always hoped a game like this would find its way to you but it never did, please, just go for it. It's here now. $10 is a steal for something of this quality. You will not regret it. It might sound like I'm overselling the game a bit, but it's had a bigger effect on me than games normally do. I'm already kinda nostalgic about this game despite only getting into it recently because there's so much about it that I just can't help loving the more I think about it. Last time I said this was going to be a Metroidvania unlike any other, and I meant it. Swimming is a joy, and they give you such a fun world to play in. I don't think I'll ever see anything quite like it on this level or scale again. It's been a crazy generation for these types of games to flourish like they have. There's a lot of retro games out there now, there's a lot of artsy games, there's a lot of Metroidvanias, old and new. But there's only one game like Aquaria, and it's waiting for you to dive into it. I don't want to see a treasure like this lost to the tides of time and forgotten because hardly anyone's played it. So pick it up if you're in the mood for a magical adventure in a beautifully realized world with a serviceable story, a good character, and tons of great moments to remember for years to come. I just hope I was at least able to give this game its due. Like I've said a bunch of times now, I'm going to be releasing another video about this game, but I'm going to wait a few weeks and give people a chance to check Aquaria out for themselves. Hopefully some will have actually played it by the time I upload that video and I won't be spoiling it for everyone. I want more people to see this game, to experience it themselves, so if I can help it along at least a little bit with these videos, that'll be great. I don't have a lot of time to edit videos these days, so I want to be positive and focus on games like these. See you next month in part 2!